Why can't you be like your brother? That was the chorus of my childhood. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, my parents only saw me as a shadow of their golden child. Every time they said those words, something inside me broke. They thought they were teaching me discipline. What they were really teaching me was how to fight back. Before we dive in, you're watching True Revenge, where every betrayal meets justice. Subscribe now so you never miss when karma strikes back. I was born second, and from the start, that was my curse. My brother Daniel came first, 2 years older, taller, stronger, and, in my parents' eyes, perfect. By the time I learned how to walk, they were already holding me up against him like a broken measuring stick. When I brought home a drawing from kindergarten, excited to show them the rainbow I'd made, my mother smiled politely and said, "That's nice, but Daniel's drawing was chosen for classroom wall." My father ruffled my hair absent-mindedly, barely glancing down, and said, "You should try harder, son. Learn from your brother." That phrase, "learn from your brother," haunted me like a curse. It became the background music of my childhood, echoing in my ears when I tried to celebrate even the smallest victories. By the time I was 10, the comparisons weren't just subtle, they were knives. When Daniel scored 3 goals in a soccer game, Dad treated him to ice cream and a new pair of cleats. When I scored one, Dad shrugged and said, "Daniel would have scored more." At 12, I spent weeks building a model airplane. I saved up my allowance to buy the pieces, stayed up late piecing every part together, and proudly brought it to the living room to show my parents. My father barely looked up from his newspaper. "Daniel's science fair project is real engineering," he said. "This is just a toy." It wasn't just that I was being ignored. It was that Daniel was being exalted. Every mistake I made was magnified, while every mistake he made was explained away. If Daniel got in trouble at school, Dad said, "Boys will be boys." If I so much as forgot my homework, he growled, "Why can't you be more responsible like your brother?" That question, "Why can't you be like your brother?" became my scar. I heard it at the dinner table. I heard it when relatives visited. I heard it whisper behind doors when my parents thought I couldn't hear. And Daniel, he knew it. He basked in it. He wore his golden boy status like armor. He'd smirk at me across the table, knowing that no matter what he did, Mom and Dad would defend him, and no matter what I did, they'd tear me down. One night, when I was 13, it all came to a head. We were at the dinner table, and I told my parents I'd been chosen as lead in the school play. I was proud. I had worked hard, rehearsed for weeks, and finally got recognition. My father barely paused in cutting his steak. "That's good, but your brother just got captain of the soccer team. That's leadership. That's something to be proud of." I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. My brother smirked, leaning back like a king. My mom nodded in agreement and said, "Maybe if you played more sports instead of wasting time with plays, you've learned real discipline." I looked at them, my own parents, and felt something inside me crack. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was betrayal. They weren't just failing to support me. They were actively breaking me down to lift Daniel higher. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I whispered to myself, "One day, they'll see. One day, they'll regret treating me like I'm nothing. One day, they'll know exactly who I am." It was the first time I ever thought of revenge. Not just proving them wrong, but making them feel the weight of the words they had thrown at me like chains. As the years went on, the gap only widened. Daniel was given every opportunity. When he turned 16, Dad handed him the keys to a brand new car. When I turned 16, I was told I could borrow it, if Daniel wasn't using it. When Daniel wanted to apply to an expensive summer program, Mom and Dad wrote the check without hesitation. When I asked for a cheaper music camp, they told me, "We can't afford luxuries like that." Luxuries. That's what they called my dreams. At family gatherings, the humiliation was worse. Aunts and uncles would clap Daniel on the back, praising his grades, his sports trophies, his scholarships. Then some would glance at me, hesitate, and ask politely, "And how are you doing?" My parents always answered for me with a sigh. "He's still finding his way." Not like Daniel. It was as if my identity didn't exist outside of being not Daniel. But here's the part they never understood. Every insult, every dismissal, every time they told me I wasn't enough, it wasn't breaking me. It was shaping me, hardening me, forging me into someone who would one day turn all that pain into power. I started keeping a journal, not of my feelings, but of their words. Every cruel remark, every unfair comparison, every time they made me feel invisible. I wrote it all down. I told myself it would matter one day. That one day, this record of their betrayal would serve a purpose. And as I got older, that purpose became clearer. If they thought I would always be their second choice, their afterthought, their scapegoat, they were wrong. Because I was planning, watching, learning. And when the time came, I would give them an answer to their question, why can't you be like your brother? That they would never forget. The older we got, the sharper the divide became. Daniel wasn't just a golden child anymore. He was a family's crown jewel. By the time he entered high school, he was a star athlete, the honor roll student, the kid teachers brag about in the faculty lounge. My parents wore his achievements like medals pinned to their own chests. Me? I became the shadow that made his light seem brighter. Every dinner became a report card of Daniel's greatness, his test scores, his victories, his leadership awards. When the conversation turned to me, the tone shifted. He's trying. He just needs focus. Maybe one day he'll figure it out. Those words burned worse than insults. Pity is crueler than anger, and my parents pitied me as though I were broken beyond repair. At 15, the difference hit me like a punch in the gut. Daniel had just won another soccer championship, and my parents threw him a party. Balloons, banners, the whole extended family invited. That same week, I'd won a regional writing competition, first place out of hundreds of students. I walked into the kitchen, holding the certificate, beaming. My mother barely looked up from frosting Daniel's cake. That's nice, honey. Now wash up and help set the table. I stood there, certificate shaking in my hand, while she fussed over Daniel's medals on the counter. That was the day I realized my victories would never be celebrated. Not in this house, by the time I was 18. The favoritism had carved me into someone harder, quieter, always calculating. I didn't compete for their attention anymore. I studied them. Every sigh, every compliment, every dismissal, I learned exactly how they thought. And I told myself that one day, I'd use it. College only made it worse. Daniel was shipped off to a prestigious university, tuition paid in full by my parents. He left with a car, a credit card for emergencies, and hugs that lasted too long. When it was my turn, Dad slapped a brochure from the local community college on the table and said, "This is more your speed. Besides, we can't pay for both of you. Both of us." As if Daniel's education was the investment and mine was a waste of money. So I stayed home, community classes while Daniel lived a life of privilege, sending home glossy photos of campus parties and internships lined up through Dad's business friends. Every picture he sent was like salt in the wound, proof that my parents had chosen their favorite and left me to scavenge the scraps. And yet, I didn't collapse. I adapted. I worked nights, saved money, built connections of my own. Every time I packed boxes at the warehouse, I imagined Daniel sleeping in his dorm bed, dreaming of his next triumph. I imagined my parents beaming at a graduation, and I swore to myself, they'll regret underestimating me. They'll choke on their pride one day. The breaking points weren't just big events. They were the small, everyday humiliations that piled up until I couldn't breathe. One Thanksgiving, when I was 20, Daniel brought home a girlfriend. Blonde, polished, the kind of girl my parents adored. At dinner, she complimented the meal, and my mother leaned across the table with a glowing smile. We've always told Daniel he deserves the very best. And look at him, he always delivers. Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second, just enough to remind everyone who wasn't delivering. My father laughed and raised his glass. To Daniel, our pride and joy. I lowered my fork, stomach twisting, as the entire table echoed the toast. Pride and joy. That's what he was. What was I? The afterthought. But the cruelest betrayal came not from words, but from choices. When I turned 21, I applied for a loan to start a small business. Nothing extravagant, just a repair shop I'd been planning for years. I asked my parents if they'd co-sign, the way they had when Daniel wanted to lease his first apartment. My father didn't even hesitate. No, you're not reliable with money. Besides, Daniel's looking into grad school. We need to save for that. Save for Daniel. Always Daniel. I remember walking out of that room, chest heavy, feeling as though the last bit of hope had been ripped out of me. Not only did they refuse me, they didn't even consider me worth the risk. In their eyes, I wasn't a son. I was a liability. Still, life has a way of turning pressure into fuel. I took that rejection and let it harden into determination. I worked 3 jobs, saved every dollar, and launched a business on my own. And slowly it began to grow. Customers came back, word spread, and for the first time in my life, I tasted success, my success, built without them. But here's the thing about parents like mine. They only notice you when you become useful. Because as soon as my shop gained traction, they came knocking. Not with congratulations, but with expectations. Your brothers had some unexpected expenses. My mother said one afternoon, voice sweet, but eyes sharp. Maybe you could help him out. After all, family supports family. Family. The same family that had crushed me under their favoritism for years. Now they wanted my help? I swallowed my anger and forced a smile. Of course, I said, family first. But inside, I was already planning, already preparing, because I knew this was just the beginning to Daniel's golden boy image started to crack in adulthood. He wasn't as untouchable as he had been in high school. Behind the polished exterior, he was reckless, gambling, overspending, leaning on the safety net of our parents' blind devotion. And every time he stumbled, they turned to me, not out of respect, but out of desperation. You're so responsible, they'd say. We can always count on you. Count on me to clean up his mess. Count on me to fund his mistakes. Count on me to carry the burden while he played the hero. It was almost laughable. For years, they had told me I wasn't good enough. Now I was their crutch. But betrayal, once planted, grows like poison. Every time they leaned on me, every time they praised Daniel, while quietly begging me to bail him out, I filed it away. I kept score. And I told myself, this ledger will balance. One day. The debt will come due by the time I was 25. The tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Daniel was drowning in debt, still worshipped by my parents, still shielded from consequences. I was steady, independent, quietly successful, but still invisible, until the day they crossed a line so deep, it turned resentment into resolve. One evening, my father sat me down. His tone was gentle, but the words were a knife. We need you to sign the property over to Daniel. He's the one with a future. If it's in his name, the family legacy will be secure. I stared at him, the air leaving my lungs. Secure? By cutting me out completely? By giving everything, the land, the house, the inheritance, to the same brother who had been handed my place in the family since birth? I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all hit me at once. You really think he's the one with a future? You think he'll protect the family? My father's jaw tightened. Don't be difficult. You'll have your own path. But Daniel is the one we can rely on. Those words, the one we can rely on, burned hotter than fire. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was betrayal, complete and absolute. And betrayals demand an answer. When my father asked me to sign the property over to Daniel, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not with shouting or rage, but with a quiet snap of a bone that would never set right again. I smiled in that moment, nodded even, because after a lifetime of being dismissed, I'd learned how to hide my true feelings. But inside, I was a furnace. For days after that conversation, I walked through life in a fog. At the shop, I fixed engines by muscle memory alone. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest tightening with every thought of Daniel's smug face, my mother's doting words, my father's blind devotion. They had chosen their legacy, and it wasn't me. The bitterness was suffocating, but beneath it, something else stirred, clarity. I had spent my whole life waiting for recognition, begging for scraps of approval, hoping that one day they'd see me. But they never would. That much was obvious now. So I stopped waiting. The first step was silence. Revenge, I knew, wasn't loud. It wasn't a tantrum or a scream at the dinner table. It was patience. It was letting them think they had won while I sharpened my knife in the shadows. I pretended to go along with their request. "I'll think about it," I told them, keeping my voice even. "But I want to make sure the paperwork's all in order." My father nodded, satisfied, already confident that I would fold away I always had. My mother even patted my hand, as if to say, "Good boy, obedient son." Inside, though, I was laughing. Not with humor, but with a cold anticipation of a man who finally sees the board clearly. That I began watching Daniel more closely. He was unraveling faster than even I'd imagined. Nights spent gambling. Credit cards maxed. Loans whispered about in hushed tones when he thought no one could hear. He wasn't a man with a future. He was a man with a countdown. And I decided I would be the one to light the fuse. I started small. I asked casual questions when we spoke, feigning brotherly concern. "How's work going? Everything good with the bank? Need any help with bills?" He'd shrug, play it off, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. He was drowning, and I was the only one who noticed. The beauty of it was that my parents were blind. They still saw him as a golden boy, incapable of failure, and I encouraged that blindness. "Daniel's doing great. I'd say at dinner, he's at everything under control." They'd beam, never realizing the irony. The second step was control. I began putting my finances in order, tightening every loose end. I reinvested in the business, set up accounts they didn't know about, built a safety net so strong that nothing could pull me under. I made myself untouchable, while Daniel's foundation crumbled beneath him. And then, slowly, I dangled rope. Not enough to save him, just enough to let him hang himself. "Hey, I've got a little extra cash flow," I'd mentioned casually. "If you need to borrow, I can help. Just small amounts, though. Business has expenses." He jumped at it. At first, a few hundred, then 1,000, then more. I kept records of everything, neat and precise. Every loan had his signature, his desperation inked onto paper, and why parents thought I was supporting him out of brotherly love. They praised me for it. "See how responsible you are?" my mother said one afternoon. "You're finally stepping up for the family." I bit back a smile. They had no idea they were praising me for tightening the noose. But revenge isn't just about money. It's about truth. And truth, once revealed, can shatter illusions in a way that no amount of shouting ever could. So I waited until Daniel's debts reached a point he couldn't hide. I knew it was coming. The missed payments, the angry calls, the whispers that followed him into every room. And then, at just the right moment, I let my parents see it. We were sitting at dinner when my phone buzzed. I made a show of glancing at the screen, frowning. My mother noticed immediately. "What is it, dear?" I hesitated, just long enough to plant the seed. "It's nothing. Just a reminder about a payment your son owes me." The room froze. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. My father's head snapped toward him. "What payment?" Daniel stammered, face pale. "It's nothing. Just a loan. I've got it covered." But I didn't let him off the hook. Calmly, deliberately, I pulled a stack of signed IOUs from my jacket pocket and placed them on the table. One by one, the weight of proof. Silence crashed over the room. My parents stared, disbelief etched into their faces. Daniel's mask crumbled. For the first time, they saw him, not the golden boy, not the perfect son, but the reckless man he truly was. And they saw me too, the son they had dismissed, belittled, ignored. Now the one holding all the power. But the reveal was only part of the plan. The real blow was still to come. Because while my parents reeled from the truth, I had already prepared the final move. The property they wanted me to sign over? I had taken care of that quietly, legally, ensuring that it could never be touched by Daniel's debts or my parents' manipulations. The land, the house, the business, all safeguarded under my name, beyond their reach. When my father finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell us?" I leaned back, meeting his eyes. For the first time, I wasn't the boy begging for approval. I was the man delivering judgment. Because you wouldn't have believed me. You never did. You only believed in him. And now you can live with the truth. My mother's lip trembled. Daniel glared at me, fury and shame burning in his eyes. But there was nothing he could say. The evidence was undeniable. That night, I walked out of their house with my head high, the stack of IOUs tucked back into my pocket. I didn't need to shout or gloat. The damage was done. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about exposure. And in that moment, the exposure was total. For the first time in their lives, my parents had to face the reality they had refused to see. Daniel wasn't the hero. I wasn't the failure. The roles they had written for us no longer existed. And I savored it, every second of their silence, every flicker of doubt in their eyes, every crack in the pedestal they had built for Daniel. But this was only the beginning, because betrayal that deep doesn't just demand truth, it demands justice. And I was far from finished. They thought the revelation at that dinner table was the end of it, that the stack of IOUs, the silence, and the weight of truth would be enough to satisfy me. Maybe they even believed I had finally gotten what I always wanted: recognition, proof that I wasn't the failure they had painted me to be. But they were wrong. That was only the spark. The real fire was still to come. The morning after that dinner, the phone calls began. My father tried to sound calm, measured, as though he could sweep last night under the rug. "You embarrass your brother," he said. That was unnecessary. I laughed into the receiver, a sound so foreign it startled me. I embarrassed him? No, Dad. He embarrassed himself. All I did was show you the truth you didn't want to see. He didn't respond. The silence on his end was heavier than words, and for once, I let him carry it. Daniel, though, didn't stay silent. He stormed into my shop that afternoon, fists clenched, eyes bloodshot from either rage or another sleepless night. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "They'll never love you the way they love me. You're still nothing." His words might have cut me years ago, but not now, not after everything. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Maybe, but at least I don't owe everyone in this town money I can't pay back." His face crumpled for a second before hardening again. He shoved me, but I didn't move. The balance of power had shifted, and we both knew it. That was when I realized something vital. Humiliation wasn't enough. My family had fed on my silence, my obedience, my invisibility. If I walked away now, they'd recover. The pedestal would be rebuilt, the lies polished until they shone again. No, if revenge was to mean anything, it had to be permanent. It had to be the kind of lesson that lived in their bones long after I was gone. So I laid the groundwork. Quietly, patiently, I began talking people Daniel owed money to, men with folded arms and cold eyes, women tired of waiting for what was theirs. I didn't pay his debts. I didn't rescue him. Instead, I let them know exactly where he stood, how deep the hole really was. I handed over copies of the IOUs, proof that Daniel's desperation ran deeper than they imagined, and I stepped back, watching the wolves circle. My parents tried to intervene, of course. They came to me one evening, their faces tight with worry. My mother begged, "Please, can't you help your brother? You have the means now. Don't let him drown." My father stood beside her, arms crossed, his pride cracking under the weight of helplessness. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. Then I remembered every time they had dismissed me, every cruel comparison, every moment they had made me feel less than my own blood. I shook my head. He made his choices. He can live with them, just like I had to live with mine. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the path I had chosen. Revenge isn't pure. It doesn't come without cost. But as I thought about Daniel's sneer, my father's blind eyes, my mother's favoritism, I knew the price was one I was willing to pay. Weeks passed, and Daniel unraveled further. His business contacts cut ties, tired of excuses. The banks circled, foreclosure notices whispering at the edges of his life. And still, he clung to the belief that our parents would save him. "Dad will figure something out." I overheard him say once. "He always does." The arrogance in his voice made me smile. Because I knew the truth. This time, Dad couldn't save him. Not when the very foundation of their blind faith had been shattered. The final act came one stormy night. Rain lashing against the windows like the world itself was demanding justice. I was in my shop, closing up, when I saw a headlight sweep across the street. Daniel stumbled in, soaked and desperate. His eyes darted around, wild, searching for some shred of hope. "You have to help me," he gasped. "They're going to take everything. The house, the cars, everything." I looked at him for a long moment, the weight of years pressing down on both of us. Then I said softly, "Do you remember when Dad told me I'd never be as good as you? When Mom said I should learn from you? When they laughed at my dreams because they weren't yours?" His mouth opened, but no words came. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "This is what better looks like. Daniel, this is what happens when you build your life on lies and debts. And I'm not saving you. Not this time. Not ever." He broke then. Truly broke. His knees at the floor, his shoulders shaking with sobs. For a moment, I almost reached out. Almost. But I stopped myself. Mercy wasn't part of this story. Justice was. And justice meant letting him fall. When he left that night, stumbling into the rain, I knew it was over. Not just his reign as a golden boy, but the illusion my parents had clung to for so long. The next week, foreclosure notices arrived at their house. Debt collectors called day and night. And for the first time in their lives, they couldn't point the finger at me. The son they had dismissed was thriving. The son they had worshipped was crumbling. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence in their eyes when they looked at me said everything. The trust, the favoritism, the blind devotion, all of it had turned to ash. And I stood there, not as a failure, not as a forgotten son, but as a man who had finally taken back his power. Revenge didn't make me whole. It didn't erase the scars of childhood spent in shadows. But it gave me something I had never had before: peace. Not because they finally saw me, but because I no longer needed them to. Their love had been conditional, their approval fleeting. My worth was never theirs to decide. Now, when people ask me about my family, I smile faintly and say, "I had a brother once. He taught me everything I needed to know about trust and about betrayal." Then I go back to my life, my business, my land, all of it mine, untouchable, protected not by their favor but by my own hands. And when I walk past the old family home, the windows dark, the garden overgrown, I don't feel sorrow. I feel justice. Because in the end, blood may bind you, but betrayal defines you. And for once, the betrayal wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. If my story is any lesson, it is this: favoritism is a poison that seeps into a family's foundation, weakening it until it crumbles. Parents may think they are lifting one child higher, but in truth, they are breaking both. The golden child grows arrogant, convinced the world owes him everything, while a forgotten child carries scars that no apology can ever erase. Love is not a prize to be won, nor a ladder where one child climbs while the other is pushed down. True love is even, steady, and unconditional. And when it is absent, resentment grows like weeds in an untended garden. My parents believed they were shaping success by praising Daniel, but in truth, they were teaching him to depend on their approval instead of his own effort. They believed they were protecting me by being hard, but all they did was teach me to fight in silence. And when the silence broke, it was too late for them, for Daniel, for the image of family they had clung to. Children are not tools to carry dreams unfulfilled. They are lives of their own, needing guidance, not comparison. And parents must remember, the words you speak in anger, the favoritism you show without thinking, will echo in your children's hearts long after you are gone. Respect is not given by default, even to parents. It must be nurtured by fairness, by listening, by treating each child as worthy. For when trust is broken, when one child is cast aside, the damage ripples into years, into generations. If you have children, let them compete with the world, not each other. Let them know they are loved equally, even if differently. Because in the end, houses can be rebuilt, fortunes can be restored, but the bond of family, once betrayed, may never return. And if you doubt that, look at my story and remember this truth. When betrayal enters a family, revenge is not just inevitable. It is earned. You've been watching True Revenge, where betrayal always meets justice. If this story struck a chord, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next twist. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen favoritism tear a family apart?